I'm David Hamburger, and in this lesson on beginning blues guitar, we're going to look at a few simple ideas that can take playing the minor pentatonic scale over a 12-bar blues and make it a much more satisfying and musical experience. We're going to look at playing notes around the root of the scale, call and response phrasing, slides, and other ideas that can help you take the basic scale and turn it into something much more musical and expressive. You don't need to learn a ton of scales to play blues, but it does help if you learn how to use those scales more effectively so that you can come up with more ideas of your own and play solos that feel satisfying and creative. That's what we're going to cover in this lesson, starting with the scale and moving on from there. So let's get going. So we're going to start off with an A minor pentatonic scale and play it in 2 octaves, starting at the 5th fret of the low string. So it's going to sound like this. And that's what we've got in example 1. Now we're playing 5 notes. Penta means 5, tonic means note. A pentatonic scale is a 5-note scale. So we're going to have the root, the flat 3rd, the 4th, the 5th, the flat 7, and then we're going to start again with the root, the flat 3rd, the 4th, the 5th, the flat 7, the root, and then we can have one more flat 3rd up here. So those are all the notes. But what we want to do is learn it in a more flexible way. Because if you just take this 2-octave scale and start playing it over the chord progression, it's going to sound like a scale. We want to be able to turn it into licks. And so in example 2, we're going to look at how to play notes around the root. So example 2A is starting at the root and just going to the flat 3rd and the 4th. And then example 2B is going down from the root to the flat 7 and the 5th. So we're starting at this root in the middle of the scale, right? Not this one and not this one, but the one right here on the 7th fret of the 4th string. And going up and then going down. And that gives us all 5 notes of the scale. Here's the root, the flat 3rd, and the 4th. And then we've got the 5th and the flat 7 over here. So that's cool because now we've got all the notes, but focused around the root, which is a note you often want to start or end with when you're coming up with licks. So in example 3, we've got a few different ways to take this little group of notes and turn them into licks. So first in 3A, we've got, or actually it's a little syncopated, so it's 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, right? So it's just the root, and then the flat 3rd, and then back to the root. Now we can take that same rhythm and go down. So now we're playing 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Going from the root down to the 5th, flat 7, and root. In example 3C, we were going up again. Same rhythm, but slightly different notes. Root, flat 3, 4, flat 3, root. So 1, 2, 3, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and. And the fact that we're using the same rhythm over and over again is also important because when you think about what you're playing rhythmically as much as what you're playing melodically, you start to see that certain rhythms come up over and over again in the blues. And instead of just thinking like, I will now play notes of the scale, if you're thinking rhythmically, you don't even have to leave the root to get something that sounds like music. So you can play that, or you can play these first examples we've done. And then, of course, let me not forget example 3D, which is, so now we're going down again. Root, flat 7, 5, flat 7, root. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, 2 and 3 and 4 and. So that's 4 different ways that you can take one simple rhythm and that little pocket of notes around the root and start to come up with some licks. Now we're going to play this over the 12-bar blues chord progression. And in example 4, we've got the 12-bar blues laid out using just simple chords, and I'll just play it all with downstrokes using an A7, and a D7 and an E7. And that would sound like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. Second bar, third bar, fourth bar, and then change to D7 for 2 bars, and then back to A7. And now we're going to go to E7, D7, there are more complicated versions of it than that, and sometimes you might go to another E chord at the end of the chord progression, but that's the basic idea. That's a basic way to play through a 12-bar blues in A. So we can talk about phrasing as the idea that, well, this lick has this kind of rhythm, right, like that. Those examples and those 4 licks in example 3, including that one, which is example 3D. But we can also think about phrasing in the big picture, like how do the licks fall and where do you leave space over the course of an entire 12-bar blues. So just to get a starting example, let's look at what happens when we take one phrase and play it every other bar over the whole 12-bar chord progression. And that's what example 5 is. And I've got a little track that I made here to play along to so you can hear how the licks fall over the rhythm itself. I'll play the same lick, and then we'll come back to the A, and now up to E, the 5 chord, and back to A. Right, so there's one complete 12-bar blues. Of course, we can work with more than one kind of rhythm for our licks. And so in example 6, we've got a different kind of phrasing. Example 6 sounds like this. 1, 2, 3, and. So we're playing the 5th, the 4th, the flat 3rd, and the root of the scale, of the A minor pentatonic scale. And the rhythm is 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and then it sort of hangs over into the next measure. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and I want to point out also it's okay to have repetition. Like we've got this one note being played 3 times in a row. Right? You don't have to keep moving from note to note. Repetition is your friend, and it's a way to create effective licks. So don't be afraid of playing the same note a couple of times in a row. Now in example 7, we've got a couple instances of call and response. And this is the idea that you play a phrase, and then you wait a minute, and then you answer that with a different phrase, so call and response. This happens all the time in the blues, either between like the first and second half of a vocal phrase, or between a vocal phrase and an answer on a soloing instrument like a guitar, harmonica, or piano, or whatever. So call and response is built into the whole style of the blues. And here we're going to take one of our first licks that we played, and then we're going to wait a measure, and then we're going to answer it with one of these new phrases. So all together we'd have 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's example 7A. Example 7B is the exact same phrasing, the same rhythm, the same space between the licks, but with different notes or different licks for both the call and the response. So the first part is the call, 1, 2, and then the response. Right, so that's 7B. And so we're starting off on the root, going to the flat third, to the fourth, and back to the flat third of the root, and then starting up here on the root, and then flat 7, 5, 4, flat 3, root, root. And again, there's some repetition, right? We hear that note twice. So one more time, for example, 7B, 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3, and like that. So when you're working with a kind of limited palette of notes, right, we've only got 5 notes we're really working with, the way you play the notes becomes really important. And we've already talked a little bit about how you phrase the notes, but also on an even smaller scale, how you articulate those notes. Do you slide into them? Do you hammer onto them? Do you pull off from them? All that kind of stuff. On electric guitar, it's really common to focus on bending the notes. That's harder to do on an acoustic guitar. It's more sort of idiomatically common to slide into notes instead. So in example 8, we've got a little bit of a breakdown about how to do that. And so in 8A, we've got these quick slides from the 4th fret to the 5th fret. Now this is the note we're really interested in, but we're going to articulate it or give it some little bit of spin by sliding into it. And it's a quick slide. So you start off with your index finger on the 4th fret and pick the note, but immediately slide it across the fret into the 5th fret position. And so example 8A sounds like this. Now when you start out, it may end up sounding more like 8B, which is ultimately what you don't want. Aside from sounding like the Jaws theme, play it on a piccolo, it's not really what we want, because this is the sound of 2 different notes. What we want is the articulation. We want the sound of the 5th fret colored by the fact that you're coming from the 4th fret. So that's the difference between those two things. And the most helpful thing I can think of to suggest is just remember that you want your finger to continue touching the wood of the fretboard the whole time. The minute your finger comes away from the fretboard, you're not actually going to hear the sound of the string anymore. So you have to push basically across the fret, and you're going to feel it underneath your finger as you go, but you want to keep that contact with the fretboard the entire time. Now, this will be hard on your fingers at first, so don't do it too much. Do it for a few minutes, take a break, rest your fingers, do something else, or play some other way, or just step away from the guitar, and then come back and do it a little bit more. The other thing is, you want to maintain contact, but when you're learning something new, you tend to concentrate, and when you're concentrating, you tend to push hard. So you just pay attention, because you may be like pushing too hard into the fretboard, and that will also make it hurt more and be harder to get across the fret. So it's a delicate balance. It may take a little while to get it together, but those are some of the ideas that go into making those slides sound like they're supposed to. So if we have a slide like that, we can take a lick like example 9, and instead of playing it, we can start it off with a slide, which makes it sound better, basically. So in slow motion, we're going to have 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now you can practice it without the slide first to get the phrasing. 1, 2, 3, and then you can practice the slide separately, like in example 8. And then you can try to put all that together. 2, 3, and. And even if you slow it way down, make sure that the slide is still pretty quick. And that's how to start adding that articulation of the slide into your licks. Now we can also have a slide that goes for 2 frets. This one is just a quick articulation going from the 4th to the 5th fret. That's a 1 fret distance, obviously. But we could also have a 2 fret distance like that. And so here we're going actually to the same pitch, but we're doing it on a different string. We're going from the 7th fret to the 9th fret and using the ring finger. So starting on this note, the 4th of the pentatonic scale, and then sliding to the degree of the 5th note of the scale, but it's going from the 7th fret to the 9th fret on the 3rd string. It's a lot of numbers. But so that's how we're going to start off example 10A, and then go over to the 8th fret on the 2nd string. So this is a super classic kind of blues sound. We got the 5th and the flat 7 of the pentatonic scale. And you can hold down this ring finger while you go over to get the middle finger on the next string. Because we're going to actually come back down like that. So we're going up to the 5th and the flat 7, and then we're coming down, playing the 4th and the flat 3rd and the root. So we have a quick slide here right on the downbeat, and then this shorter phrase. And the timing is 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and I'll play it even slower. 2, 3, 4. And then in example 10B, we can have this kind of slide. So now we're sliding with the pinky from the 8th fret of the 2nd string up to the 10th fret on the 2nd string. And that means we're going from the flat 7 to the root. So first we're going to play, in terms of the scale tones, we're going to play the 5th, the flat 7, and the root. Then we're going to go back to the flat 7 and slide up to the root here on the 2nd string. And so the phrasing for this is 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So 2 different ways you can add those 2 fret slides into your playing, and both of those take you out of this home position where we're anchored around the 5th fret. So that's a way to start getting out of the basic position for the scale and moving a little bit up the neck. And both of those are sort of acoustic guitar ways of translating typical electric blues licks where you might bend those notes instead. And we can use licks like this to create call and response sounds as well. So in example 11, we've got and so the count is 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. And I'll play a little slower and I'll count through the whole thing. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, 2. And there's 2 bars at the end there. 2, 2, 3, 4. Right? So call and response. And in this case, we're not leaving a lot of space between the 2 licks, but there's a change in register. Right? We're up here, and then we answer that an octave lower. And that's effective too. A lot of what call and response is about is that idea of contrast. And so here we're using high notes and then low notes to provide the contrast in the answer. So far, we've talked about taking just a small focused set of notes from the scale and how it's important to think about how you phrase those notes and thinking in terms of call and response, and also how to articulate those notes using slides. And now we come to one of my favorite things, which is thinking about playing your phrases a little bit ahead of the downbeat so that your licks sound like they're leading you into the next measure instead of reacting to the measure you're on. And this is a really simple idea, but it's incredibly effective and can go a long way towards making you feel like you are leading the way through your solo or through the blues progression rather than feeling like you're being chased by the chords as you play. It's very simple, and these 4 examples in example 12 are all phrased the same way. They start on the and of 3 and then land on 1 in the next measure. So if we're counting 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. That's the idea behind example 12A. Starting on the 5th, going to the flat 7 and then the root. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. So this kind of phrase is called a pickup. I also sometimes think of it as a short resolution because it resolves or lands or comes to a rest on the 1, on the downbeat, but you're starting off before and you're sort of ramping up and landing on the downbeat. So it's a short phrase, it resolves onto the downbeat. Short resolution is another way to think of it, but you can just call it a pickup phrase. So that's example 12A, and of course we can have different licks that use the same phrasing, like example 12B uses the slide we just worked on. So we're going to have a slide from the 7th to the 9th fret, then back to the 7th fret, 5th fret, and then home to the root. So this is the 5th, 4th, flat 3rd, and root of the A minor pentatonic scale. And the phrasing is 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. In example 12C, we're going to have the same phrasing again, but now we're going to go up like that. So we're starting on the 5th of the scale to the flat 7, back to the 5th, and over to the root. So we've got 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. And finally, for example 12D, we're going to go down and then back up to that high root. We're going to have, right, so the root, the flat 7, the 5th, and the root. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3. So 4 phrases all leading into the downbeat for short resolutions or pickup phrases that all start on the and of 3 and then resolve to the downbeat of the measure you're heading towards. Now, we could use this idea of a short pickup or short resolution, and then we could answer it with a longer phrase that also has that sense of resolution, only over a longer period of time. So in example 13, we could start with this lick, right? And so notice that we're sliding from the 4th to the 5th of the scale, 5th fret to 7th fret on the 5th string, and then over to the flat 7 in the root. So 1 and 2 and 3. And then we're going to answer and so this is a longer phrase that also starts on an and of 3. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. So that lick is going to start off going from the root to the flat 3rd to the 4th. Then we're going to have slides, these 2 fret slides from the 7th to the 9th fret, and then back to, so here we're sliding from the 4th to the 5th of the scale, and then back to the 4th, flat 3rd, root, flat 7, root. So you can think of this as a short resolution followed by a long or longer resolution. So we've got this, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. Right? One more time where I'm not talking over the whole thing. 1 and 2 and 3. Right? So call and response with these kinds of resolutions. So we've talked about how these licks resolve rhythmically, but so far we've just been laying them all in the same place, which is on the root of the A minor pentatonic scale. But another thing you can do to make your playing sound more intentional and more organized is to land on the root of whatever chord you're going to, not just land on the root of A. So if we're going to an A chord, cool, we want to land on an A. That sounds like, we were leading into this note. And it's like, yeah, we got there on purpose. But if we're going to a D chord, it would sound cool to land on the D when we get there. So it sounds like you've led us to that D chord. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, right? Like, yeah, now we're on D. And then, of course, when we're going to an E chord, do the same thing. And there's E. We're going to slide up. Now notice that all these notes are already in the A minor pentatonic scale. So that is a real benefit of using this scale over blues. It's got the roots of the 3 chords in the chord progression that we're using the scale over. So those are the licks in example 14. So example 14A, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and then example 14B, 1 and 2 and 3, landing on the D chord, and then finally 14C, landing on the E, 1 and 2 and 3, like that. So that's how you can take one lick and land it on the root of the 1 chord, A, the root of the 4 chord, D, or the root of the 5 chord, E. And that combined with the rhythmic idea of having these phrases that resolve rhythmically, you combine the idea of landing rhythmically on the downbeat with landing melodically on the root of whatever chord you're going to, and it starts to really sound like you are leading the listener through the chord progression and taking them to each point in the chord progression that you want to take them to. This really starts to make sense when you hear what a complete solo sounds like as you go through the chord progression. So in example 15, I've put together all the ideas we've been working with to create one complete solo that you can play through, and you can hear those landing points both rhythmically and melodically. Notice the call and response, see where the slides are getting put to use, and notice that it's all being done just using this one little pocket of notes that we've been working with from the start of the lesson. So here's what it sounds like. 1, 2, 3. So that's the idea. You don't need to be able to play a million scales. You don't need to be able to play in a lot of different keys to get started playing blues. And blues is a very accessible way to get started playing with other people and having fun improvising on a familiar chord progression that most people will know how to do something with. So if you already do play some blues, I hope this has given you some additional ideas for how to sharpen and focus your playing and start to build more of a vocabulary of your own using these ideas around phrasing and targeting the roots and call and response. There are, of course, a lot more lessons here on the site, and I encourage you to explore as many of them as you can. You can find me on YouTube at Fretboard Confidential and at my website, fretboardconfidential.com. Thanks for watching. For Acoustic Guitar, I'm David Hamburger.